He's gone, but I don't know where he's gone.
Otherwise we can have one ear each.
We'll have one each. No? Okay.
So I start? I wait for the...
You can start.
It's very hot here.
I think we have streaming already.
We have.
Yeah, streaming.
We do.
Yeah. ¿Ya? Vale. Bueno, por favor, vais tomando asiento. Nos comentan que ya está solucionado. Está solucionado el tema de Internet y Wi-Fi. Como podéis ver aquí, hay subtitulado. Eso os permite también... Os permite conectaros por Wi-Fi a redes sociales por si alguien está interesado y asimismo, si alguien lo necesita, puede ver los subtitulados en el tamaño que quiera escoger en su teléfono inteligente. No tengo ni idea de tecnología, pero es eso, ¿no? Vale. Bueno, vamos a empezar la segunda parte de la mañana, que como todos sabéis es también muy interesante. Ha habido una intención de colaboración por parte de todo el mundo que a mí me ha sorprendido. Ha sido la primera llamada ofreciendo participar en estas jornadas y enseguida han dicho que sí. Os voy a presentar, yo creo que es más cómodo ir presentando uno a uno, o sea, a una persona y que haga su presentación y luego a la siguiente para que recordéis, tengáis más fresca la información. En primer lugar, va a participar Richard Simon. Su apellido está bien con acento porque es de padre español y entiende un poquito de español. Richard Simon es socio y director de planificación de la agencia Applied, que es una agencia multidisciplinaria que realiza sistemas legibles y que está especializada en proyectos de wayfinding. Él explicará todo lo que es esto de wayfinding para quien no esté familiarizado con el término. En la actualidad, este estudio participan en proyectos de ciudades del Reino Unido, Shanghái, China, en proyectos de wayfinding también a menor escala, como por ejemplo en Wembley. Anteriormente ha sido responsable de proyectos en esquemas de wayfinding en Brighton, en Leeds, en Vancouver, en Londres. En Londres tienen un proyecto muy bonito, que es el que yo más he visto, que se llama Legible London. Y otros proyectos importantes han sido I Walk New York, que tiene estrategias de wayfinding para recorrer espacios caminando. Asimismo, ha trabajado en este sentido en centros comerciales, hospitales y campos universitarios. Pues muchas gracias. ¿No tienes los...? ¿Sí? Vale. Muchas gracias por estar aquí y adelante, Richard.
Thank you very much. Shall I operate how do I operate the...
No, it doesn't work.
I don't know. I think we need to, do we need to sit?
Sí, necesitamos, what, to move there? I don't know. I don't know what we need to... So we need a chair. A chair? Somebody needs a chair? It's fine, it's fine.
Yeah? Thank you. Thank you. Yes, English translated into English. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. Madrid is my second home, my second favourite city after London. It's a beautiful city. As was just explained, my father is from Alcalá de Henares, and despite the fact that I am half Spanish, my Spanish is so poor that I have to speak to you in English, so I apologise for that. What I want to talk about today is Legible London. But first of all, let me just talk about wayfinding in general. Wayfinding is a technique that uses sensory cues in the environment to help people understand where they are and how to get around. It's not just signage. And as a means to explain this, I was brought up near a chocolate factory in North London. And it was the smell of chocolate from the chocolate factory that defined the place in which I lived. No name. I didn't have to say the name of the place. I just needed to say, oh, it was by the chocolate factory. And people, as soon as they were close, could smell the chocolate, and they knew that that was the area in which I lived. So it is sensory cues, not simply visual. Legible London is a project that from the start we wanted to make accessible for all people. I mean, our idea was that the on-street system would be one part of a connected information system. We believe that information has to be made as accessible for everybody in order to make places accessible. We established a framework that supported all people that were making multimodal journeys using digital, mobile, print, and on-street. And that system is currently being implemented, but there is still some way to go. The driving force behind the Legible London project was the changing city, and really the Olympics in 2012. The new mayor that came in 2000 wanted to make London the most walkable city in the world. He wanted to make sure that London competed with its international rivals, New York, Paris. And he wanted to make sure that by the time the Olympics was established, that it would be connected into central London and into the fabric of London as a whole. And Legible London was one of those tools and projects that was going to allow him to do that. When we first started, we needed to understand what tools people used to navigate and how people got around the city. What we found was that a lot of people were using personal tools because of the lack of information on street. Maps. A common factor was that people used to stop and ask where things were. And one of the most surprising facts was that we found that 45% of people were using the tube map to navigate above ground. And it's unsurprising in many respects because it is a great piece of design, an iconic piece of design for London. But as a pedestrian map, it's not very good. All it did was give you a rough geography of some tube names and not an understanding of how the city connects. The success of the tube map and the information system for public transport, and in particular the tube, meant that many journeys were being made by train, by the underground, when they could have actually been made on foot. One of our first pieces of research found that there are 109 journeys between adjacent stations that were being made by underground when they could have been made, when they were quicker to be made by foot. And since the study, we found another 10 more. Another of London's problems, apart from an apostrophe missing, was the fact that there were 33 different systems, wayfinding systems on street in the central area. Now, this meant that many people, or that people had to learn many different languages, and that systems in adjacent areas were disconnected. So the question we asked was, is this a problem? And these are 4 signs. You can see that the top left, Holborn here is 6 minutes walk. On the top right, Shoreditch Town Hall is a quarter M, which we assume in this case isn't meters or minutes, but in fact is miles. The Cabinet War Rooms are 225 meters, very precise. Obviously an engineer had designed that. And the bottom right, the Mark Lane is either 24 hours or 210 yards. It's completely confusing. And this is one element of how the system broke down once you moved from one area to another. And what I wanted to do is, I loved the presentation that was shown earlier about signs that actually were difficult to interpret or that caused problems. This is one that we found in Milton Keynes, which was easily vandalized. This one here, we had 3 signs sending you to Charing Cross Road, and Charing is actually spelled incorrectly with 2 R's. And just in case you think that that's only for informal signs, here, a highway sign with Piccadilly spelt incorrectly with 1 C. And this sign is also confusing because when you first look at this, it's easy to think that Piccadilly and Hyde Park are in an ahead direction rather than right. And one of the key principles in wayfinding is don't make me think. And signs and information that makes you think start to, or don't work. Here, next right turn with a left arrow. This one, way out in all directions. And this one is just simply no. And here you can see what the designer is thinking. They've put the wording in the direction of travel, but people don't read that way. And actually this should be written no cycling or skating from top down. Here the direction arrow for the Work and Learn Centre is confusing, as it looks like you have an underground access. And here we had precise distances to toilets. Why they both can't just say 10 meters, I'm not sure. And another example of precision, this is parking for 48 hours or precisely 2,880 minutes. So when we first started researching Legible London, one of the things that we did was we asked one of our students to map what she knew, what areas she knew in London. And this is what she drew. The way she navigated London was by popping up at the stations, walking around those areas and returning back to the same station. She didn't know how to connect those places. Interestingly, the geography and the way that she understood London was by the tube map, and actually, geographically, her view of London was distorted. What Legible London tried to achieve, is to fill in those spaces, give people the confidence to move out of one zone that they know that they're very familiar with and know well, into another zone. Give people the confidence to get lost, to explore. We did a lot of research about memory, about what creates good memories, about why people remember things. And we learned that there's an area of the brain called the hippocampus, where place cells are created. Every time you have a new experience, place cells are created. Most of the time, these place cells die away. But sometimes they stick. And as they grow, they become memories. And what we try to understand in our wayfinding, the design for wayfinding, is how we can support that function of making sure that the place cells that are created stay with you. One of the ways in which we analysed the city was by asking people to draw mental maps. This is someone's mental map of Covent Garden in London, and it shows the piazza at the bottom. It shows a strong east-west connection on Longacre. And what's interesting about this is that it's actually quite wrong. The sense of geography in Neal's Yard and Seven Dials is completely wrong. But what we learned from this is that the strong north-south, east-west axis was correct and was a key factor in the way that this person perceived Covent Garden. And by asking people, hundreds of people, to draw mental maps of their areas using the techniques and styles that they felt comfortable with, it gives us a very good, or gave us a very good understanding of how people see the city, what landmarks are important to them, what streets are important to them. So we brought this process to Legible London, and when we looked at the design phase, one of the key elements that we did was to put in a prototype area of 19 signs in the West End. This allowed us to test some theories, and so that we could refine any problems with the design before the system was rolled out. Now, that process was quite a long process. We engaged with hundreds of different people. We tested hundreds of different designs. And I think here, the design evolved from something close to that top image. And although the numbers are quite small here, the iteration of the map at the bottom is 293. And we genuinely went through that many iterations to make sure that the map was fit for purpose. We developed a set of wayfinding principles about consistent naming, about progressive disclosure, which is that you can't sign everything from everywhere. You need to create a system that allowed people to make their journeys in bite-sized chunks. It's a system that's quite common on the motorway or for highway signage when, if you're driving from one large city to another, you don't include all of the smaller towns and cities on the directional information. You include the endpoints, the termination points. Another principle was don't make me think. And one of the key factors that one of the key design approaches that we took to support Don't Make Me Think was the use of heads-up mapping. In our research, we found that most people who weren't so familiar with maps preferred to use heads-up mapping. That way, they were able to place themselves in the environment by looking round the sign and seeing what was in front of them, physically was in front of them on the map. And there are other principles which I'll go through now. One of the key principles was this idea that we needed to develop the universal system, one that was accessible to all. When that came to inclusivity, we realized that we needed to borrow a definition of inclusivity from the work, I think, that Anne, that you may have done, which is that inclusivity is a product or service or environment that does not exclude any section of society. It considers all users, including people with disabilities, and is a positive step towards a universal system. And we went through all the available best practice guides and codes so that we could understand what would be best at each stage. And again, this includes the inclusive mobility that Anne was so instrumental. And we met with a number of organizations, including those representing people with visibility impairments, with learning difficulties. And we also met with a number of access consultants so that we could seek their views about what would be the best system for London. So inclusivity isn't just about a single disability. Even within visual impairments, there are many different types that affect people in many different ways. People with severe dyslexia. We met with wheelchair users, both motorized and manual. People with limited mobility, with multiple sclerosis, arthritis. We met with people young and old, and people who were residents, commuters, and visitors. So our approach was to consult as widely as we could with as many of the right people. And what we recognized very early is that no one-size-fits-all solution. One of the key points that we recognized early on was about the scale of the product, the scale of the sign that was going on street. I'm just going to talk about the on-street signage system for a moment. The signs are about 2.4 meters tall and have a yellow banner at the top. And that was specifically designed so that in an environment where there is a lot of visual competition, the signs would still be able to say, yes, I'm over here. We then had a very clear directional, addressing and directional panel at the top, which allowed people to know where they were and where the key destinations were. And then the core piece of information, which was the mapping, or let's say the information-rich section, the mapping, was centrally located so that it was within the right height for people with all different abilities. And the standard of including mapping information, the fine detail, between 900 and 1800 millimeters from the ground is a standard wayfinding, a standard component of wayfinding design. We also, through our discussions, talked about the opportunity for including transmitters so that people would understand when they were close to signs. And this would enable information and an audio description to be broadcast to them. So as I said, the heads-up mapping was a key component. What we found is that 70% of people who weren't used to using maps and didn't like to access maps found heads-up much more accessible than north-up. It took out that layer of having to orientate yourself in the city by conceptualizing which way round the map had to be turned. Other key factors that came out of this was really looking at a pedestrian level of detail on the maps, to include steps, to include pedestrian crossings, to include standard set of icons internationally recognized, to ensure that where there was accessible facilities, where there were accessible facilities, these would be shown, to put a walk circle on the map so that people understood how far things were. And the type we used the New Johnson type, which is used by Transport for London, which is a very legible type. And we defined some standards that made sure that the right type size was included in the right location, was used in the right location. And we used upper and lower case to describe, to spell out most words, because we recognized that upper and lower case was easier, more legible for people. And we also used 3D buildings, illustrations, to help people place themselves on the map and understand what the key landmarks were. Now, this all had to be designed within a balance, what we call parsimony, a balance of information. Too much, and the information becomes overwhelming and illegible. Too little, and the information starts not to be, let's say, not as useful. So we always strove to get that balance right. And this is an example of one of the maps that we used, that we created. Another part of the system was about predictability, of the design was predictability. We needed to use a consistent set of names that would link information on public transport with that on street. We also needed to use consistent placement. So people needed to know where they could pick up printed maps, that on every bus shelter there would be connected information, and that in every station there would be connected information. And for on street, we developed a placement strategy that helped define where signs should go in predictable locations. And what this was again a balance between providing enough information on street but avoiding clutter. And what we found was through a rigorous planning process, we were able to produce an optimal placement. And the way we describe it is that just at the point at which people might start becoming anxious, they would happen upon a sign. This gives an idea of the density of signs within the prototype and central London area. We calculated that a city such as London requires about 80 signs per square kilometre. In this area of 19 signs, we actually removed over 300 redundant signs and street furniture items. So alongside the implementation of any wayfinding system has to be a rigorous clutter reduction exercise. Broadly, the results of the the project have shown about 1/3 decrease in people feeling lost. And that's an important point, because what we wanted to achieve was we wanted to achieve a reduction in people's anxiety. Because people who are less anxious are happier, have better experiences, and are more willing to explore cities. It also generated a 16% saving in journey times. And any transport system that generates 16% saving in journey times produces a fantastic return on investment. People became much more aware of the place that they are in and of the offer around them. And 62% of people said that the system would encourage them to walk more. Now, presently, it's being rolled out across a number of areas. It's used on hoardings as a large-scale format. It's used on public transport connections. There's a digital component that is being prototyped at the moment, in which we're involved with. And that hopefully will be coming early in the new year. And it's used as the foundation for the cycle hire system and the cycle and superhighway. Now, we also independently developed a prototype for a digital smartphone app, because we recognized that another of the key principles is give people information in the way that they want to receive it. And a lot of people, most people are using digital mobile phones, and therefore an app is a missing piece of the jigsaw. And as I say, we've developed that independently. It was used as a cornerstone for wayfinding on the Olympics, and is also going to be rolled out into the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park and other parks in London. So it's a system that we developed that could be expanded, and presently is being rolled out in many different locations. So at the moment there are 1,300 signs on street. We calculated that to cover the major areas of London would require close to 4,000 signs. It's located in 550 cycle hire stations, 300 metro stations. It appears on 12,000 bus shelters and 19,000 bus stops. So it's a comprehensive system that supports people at every part of their journey. But as I said earlier, we really recognize that more needs to be done. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Richard. A continuación, Ann Frye nos va a hablar sobre transporte y discapacidad intelectual, cognitiva. Ann es especialista a nivel internacional en asesorar sobre las necesidades de las personas mayores y personas con discapacidad en el transporte. Trabaja para entidades públicas, comerciales y profesionales en la búsqueda de soluciones que den respuesta a las necesidades de movilidad en todos los medios de transporte y entornos peatonales. Es directora de una organización sin ánimo de lucro que se llama Passepartout Training Sociedad Limitada, especializada en entrenar al personal de la industria y de la aviación en los requisitos legales y buenas prácticas que satisfagan las necesidades de los pasajeros con discapacidad. Ha dirigido el grupo de pasajeros con discapacidad en líneas aéreas de la Conferencia Europea Civil de Aviación desde 1996 a 2012 y en la actualidad codirige la investigación que se está llevando a cabo dentro de actividades internacionales de transporte accesible y movilidad. Participa en proyectos de la Comisión Europea y de la Fundación Europea de las Ciencias para desarrollar buenas prácticas en autobuses accesibles y ferrocarril. Asimismo, ha sido asesora de autoridades relacionadas con el transporte en Canadá, Hong Kong, Australia, Nueva Zelanda e Irlanda. Y en la actualidad está trabajando en Naciones Unidas en el Foro Internacional de Transporte, en todo lo relacionado a implicaciones de movilidad de la población que envejece. Ann, gracias. Cuando quieras.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a pleasure to be here. I want to move on from the wayfinding that Richard has been talking about and to focus in particular at the importance of cognitive accessibility in the transport environment for people who are travelling. Let me start with what is a typical scene that we will all know. This is actually the Gare du Nord in Paris, but it could be any mainline station in any city in Europe. How many of those people are feeling confident, calm, aware of where they are and where they're going? I suspect not so very many. So, what are the issues for transport? I think the key one that we always tend to forget is that with more and more older people in our populations, we have more and more people for whom travelling is stressful and difficult. There is also, of course, a very strong correlation between age and disability. Some 2/3 of disabled people are older people, and there is a strong likelihood of conditions like dementia and stroke, which are age-related. In addition to that, we have in all our populations a large number of people who have cognitive or learning disabilities or who have mental health impairments. And traditionally, their needs have simply not been recognized in the transport environment. And perhaps the biggest factor of all is that for all of us, if we're in unfamiliar places, if we're strangers, if we're foreigners, we don't know the language of the city, we all have a cognitive impairment at that time. So for all of us moving around the transport system, it is vital that communication and information is available to all of us. So what are the problems? Finding your way. Again, we will all be familiar with that. My experience this morning, arriving in the airport here in Madrid, running because I was late, trying to find the way out of the airport. They direct you very cleverly through the duty-free shop, and once you're there, the signs that say exit are very small and grey, and the signs that say bargain, wine, perfume are very big and bright, so you're immediately confused. Where am I going? I haven't got time to buy wine, I need to get out. But already you're lost, and your sense of direction has been taken away by the hierarchy of signs. This is not a criticism of Madrid. Almost every airport in the world has done the same thing. Increasingly, airports are shopping malls with a few aeroplanes attached, but the main purpose increasingly seems to be to sell us things. It's very tiring. Again, airports in particular are enormous. You practically walk back to the city you flew from. So you get very tired, and on top of that, having to try all the time to think, where am I going, is exhausting. A lot of people find it very difficult to concentrate or to remain vigilant. How many of us have stopped and asked directions, and then as soon as the person who gave us the directions has gone, we've forgotten what they told us? Did he say left or did he say right? I'm not sure. So again, it's quite difficult. And of course, anxiety. The bigger and busier an environment is, the more anxious we will become. And if we're late, if we're running to catch a train or a plane, we're going to get stressed, and then our concentration is even more reduced. Further problems, small print. Timetables you see, again, all over the world. We have one here in the UK, one in Germany. Pretty much useless to anybody over the age of 40, and quite a few younger than that age. And so very technical. Even if you can read it, you probably can't understand it. Poor acoustics in big environments like stations and airports, also very difficult to hear and to understand for many people. people who speak too fast when they're making announcements. Another huge problem is how do you deal with unexpected situations? Again, a particular problem for people with learning disability. They know what to do, they know where to stand, which bus to get on. There is a disruption, a problem, everything changes, and they have no idea what to do. So that can be a huge problem in the transport environment. Inaccessible information. This picture here, I better not name the city, but it's a small airport in Belgium. Can you imagine what the person who thought that was a good way to display information was thinking? This is the only screen that tells you about flight departures. Now, you need to be very, very tall and have extremely good eyesight to have any chance of doing that. Very often, we are also deprived of information while we're traveling, particularly if there are delays or problems. Everyone who works there is so busy sorting out the problem, they forget to tell the passengers what's happening. And again, that increases levels of stress and anxiety. Confusion and disorientation, another big issue. And why? Does anybody know why every airport in the world wants to have a floor that is so highly polished that it looks like a lake? Nobody feels comfortable on those surfaces. People like me who wear high heels, you think all the time you're going to slip and fall. Anybody with walking difficulty really struggles with that. And there's been some interesting research, not yet completed, that many people with early stage dementia will see a surface like that and will think it's water, so they freeze and won't move. So there is nobody for whom a highly polished floor is an asset. And yet architects, designers all over the world are putting them into airports. I think it should be stopped. So what do we need to know? Well, before we travel, we need to know, is the journey accessible? Is every stage of the journey accessible, particularly if you have a mobility difficulty? You need to know if you have to make arrangements in advance. Will you have to change the bus from one bus to another? Will there be time to connect? When do the services run? What will I do if things are delayed? All of these things run through our minds, even as frequent travelers. But for anyone with a learning disability or a cognitive impairment, they become very challenging indeed. And then, of course, when you're on the journey, you need to know if you're making a transfer, how long do I have to wait? How do I know I'm getting on the right bus or train? How many of us have had that experience? In the UK now, it's a legal requirement that when you get on a train, before the train leaves the station, there is an audible and visual announcement that tells you where the train is going. In the past, they would make that announcement, but only when the train was gathering speed out of the station. So if you were on the wrong train, it was too late to get off. So some things happen. And you also need to know what you do if things go wrong. And in a transport environment, things are always going wrong. In the UK yesterday, because of bad storms, we had no flights, no train services, very few bus services, complete chaos. So for anyone with any kind of anxiety, that was a very difficult day to be traveling around. So what can we do about all these problems? I think there are quite a few things that I want to touch on. The first is universal design. The second is education. And then I want to look at some practical steps that can be taken and some policy measures that governments and others can take. If we start with universal design, one of the key concepts I'm sure you're familiar with is that things must be simple and intuitive. In other words, you shouldn't have to stop and think, I wonder what that means. So these very basic pictograms, you can see immediately which is a bus and which is a train. So even if you don't speak a word of the language, that will give you the basic information that you need. I think we very often overcomplicate information in the transport world. There are also many ways in which we can use good design to reduce stress. These pictures here are from Malmö railway station in Sweden. The picture at the top is the way it used to look with lots of clutter, information all over the place. They rearranged it so there were clear lines of sight. You immediately saw the clock, you could see where you needed to go, you could see the way out. That sort of design, intelligent design, makes it much easier for people to immediately understand where they have to go. And I think it's very important that if we focus on people who have the biggest problems, those with mental health or cognitive impairment, then we will get it right for everybody. So clear, simple information and signage is a very good way to reduce stress. The two examples I've put there, actually both from Germany. The top one there tells you which platform, what's the destination, how many minutes you have to wait. Very simple, very clear, and being updated all the time in real time. The second picture there shows you just a very simple design of the one line that you're going on. Too often those who design information think we need to know everything, where actually all we want to know is where am I going and how am I going to find my way. I think one of my pet themes is the lack of education that professionals in the transport world and in the highway world, and indeed architects and designers generally, they have a very low level of awareness. Certainly in many countries, it may be better here in Spain, in many countries there is no part of their professional education that focuses on issues like cognitive accessibility. And it seems to me it should be an absolute requirement. You should not be able to qualify as an architect or a designer or a planner unless you have thoroughly understood and been educated in this kind of signage. The example I've put up there is from a German airport. These are brand new signs. The architect in this case thought that putting everything in grey would be a very calming environment. So the signs are dark grey with pale grey writing on. All around you is grey, and it's horrible. You have no idea where you are, you can't read anything, you can't see anything. In that particular airport, we called the architect and made him put on what we call sim specs, which simulate cataracts and different kinds of diabetic retinopathy, and asked him to find his way around his own airport. He couldn't. The only thing he could find was the duty-free shop, which had a big yellow sign. Couldn't find the check-in, couldn't find the toilets, because they were all beautiful grey signs. So lack of education is a huge issue, and I think one that we need to tackle. So the practical steps, absolutely keep information simple. And I think it's very important that we assume that we're addressing people who have never traveled before. It's much too easy to assume that everybody is a regular traveler and to use, if you like, shorthand, so that you miss out the basic steps of information that people need. You also need to disseminate that information through non-transport routes. I remember when we first in the UK had wheelchair-accessible buses, the bus operators came to me, I was then in government, and said, well, we have these buses, but there are no wheelchair users getting on the bus. So we said, well, how have you told people that you now have accessible buses? They said, we've put a wheelchair symbol on top of the timetable at the bus stop. So you can imagine that wheelchair users were going every day to the bus stop, just in case one day there might be a little wheelchair symbol there. So you need to rethink the way that you communicate with people and take information into people's homes, put it out through local newspapers, through local media, so you communicate to people who have never thought that they might be able to travel. And one very important issue with our aging population is to remember that the generation of aging baby boomers have always been car drivers in many countries. In the UK, famously, our late Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher said on one occasion, if you are still travelling on the bus by the time you're 40, you have failed in life. Now, that was a very helpful way of encouraging people to use public transport, but it is true that we have a whole generation of people, now in their 60s and 70s, who have been driving their cars since they were 18, and have no idea how public transport works. And unless we communicate with them in a way that is very clear and simple, we're not going to get them out of their car and onto the bus or the train. And then, of course, at the time when you have to stop driving, your whole lifestyle begins to be affected because you can no longer be independent. It's also, I think, very important for those who have learning disability or people who've had strokes or with dementia that there is training before they travel. You need to teach people how to cope if something goes wrong, if something changes. You need to support people with fact sheets. In quite a number of cities now, there are what we call mentoring schemes, where to encourage people to stop using door-to-door, very expensive door-to-door paratransit. Instead, they are escorted on journeys on public transport until they have the confidence to travel alone. And I think that's a very important part of it. There's also a lot of work for children with learning disability, using interactive games so that they understand how a transport system works and they build up the confidence to travel. Simplifying information is also hugely important. What I'm showing you here is called a spider map, and this was actually invented in London by a young man with a learning disability who complained to Transport for London that he couldn't use the buses because he didn't understand the maps. There were too many routes, it was much too complicated. So the map makers in London came up with this idea of much more simple maps for one route at a time, because that's all you need to know. And of course now, almost everybody finds these spider maps much easier to use rather than the map that's got a complete mess of lines all over it. So starting from that base is a very good idea. Again, simplifying information. This is in the city of Liverpool. It was again introduced for people with learning disability, but helps everybody who needs to know they're coming out of the railway station, they need to find the bus station. Which way do I go? So very simple, intuitive steps like that. I think one of my pet hates at all stations is ticket machines. They are terrible. They are never the same in two cities. You feel completely bewildered. You don't know where do you put your credit card or your money, where does the ticket come out, what language is it going to speak. I think we all have struggled with those. Intuitive design, and I pay tribute here to Barcelona, where they involved blind people in designing the ticket machines in the metro, which meant that the whole system now is intuitive. I think you should absolutely ban transport experts from being involved in information and design of equipment, and the ticket machine is a good idea. In most cities, the engineers design the machine, so it's convenient if they need to service it, but it's not convenient if you need to buy a ticket. So we need to turn that logic on its head and start with what does the passenger need to know in order to get a ticket quickly and easily and simply. So as a general rule, asking disabled and older people, what's the first thing you want to know? You find a ticket machine in a city you're not familiar with, tell me how you would want it to be laid out. And if you follow that logic, you will come up with a system that is easier and simpler for everyone to use. Another issue that in many, many countries and cities now is causing bigger problems. In order to save money, we are taking staff away from stations and airports and bus stations. And the one thing, if you ask people, what's the one thing that would give them confidence to travel, they will tell you, it's staff. I want somebody in uniform that I can go to, even if there's a sign that says this bus is going where you want to go. Particularly older people would rather turn to somebody in uniform and say, is this the bus that I need? So the lack of staff and the loss of staff on many routes is causing increasing problems. Again, I've talked already about the need for simple and clear information. And I think very often we want to put too much information on a sign. This picture I took in the metro station in Dubai. And I think that's extremely good. It's very clear, whether or not you speak Arabic or English, you see a good clear arrow and a good clear pictogram of a train. So don't give me a whole lot of other information, just give me what I want to know. I think one very important message, if you like, is to have a hierarchy of information. So again, if you're arriving at an airport or a big terminus, ask people, what's the first thing you want to know? Probably, if you've had a long journey, you want to find the toilets. And then if it's an airport, you want to find the check-in desk. What you don't want is a whole range of information about the shops and the amusement arcade and the this and that. You've got time for that afterwards. So the way in which signs are introduced and how they're placed, the size of the font, all of that should follow a hierarchy according to the need that you have when you arrive at a place. And again, by not asking the people who work there, because they know where things are, but asking a complete stranger, if you come here, where would you want to start? You end up with a much more user-friendly system. Another huge advance in recent years has been real-time information, and that gives people reassurance, it gives them confidence. Even if the information tells you that the next bus is not for half an hour, you know that you can go and get a cup of coffee, you can take a taxi if you can't wait that long, but you are confident that you're not going to miss the bus. Two examples here. The one at the top is from a bus in London. Every bus in London now has audible and visual next stop information, which again, everybody who travels finds it easier. I now use buses in London much more than I used to because it's easier to know where you're going. The bottom picture there is from Sofia in Bulgaria, where they had very little money to spend on accessibility, and they asked blind people in particular, what's the one thing we can do that would help most? And they said, real-time audible information at bus stops. So that's what they've done. Much more use than a bus timetable and helpful to everybody. Even on a vehicle, if it's a train or a bus or whatever it is, if we're not familiar with it, if we're not sure where to find a seat, we get confused and disorientated. This example is one of a new fleet of trains just introduced in Oslo in Norway, where they've used color contrast in part for people with low vision, but also to guide people right through the train and to find seats. This is an example, again, from Transport for London, just to show how important it is to build cognitive accessibility into the whole planning and design process. I'm sure it's too small to read, but what you see there is a traffic light system against each of the headings, and one of them is usability. Is it accessible? Is it a protected environment? There's one on understanding, and legibility is a big category there. Wayfinding that Richard was talking about, service information, and then we have perception, sense of place. All of these things need to be judged as part of signing off a design process. And I think that's a very helpful way of not making the mistake of having a beautiful new place and finding that people can't find their way around it because you haven't thought through that important element. Also, increasingly, technology is available to help at an individual level as well as at a general level. Many people with learning disabilities now are using tablet computers because they can't remember a route, so they can have on their laptop, on their iPad, a route planner with pictures that help them identify where they are. It's also enormously helpful for blind and partially sighted people. The picture there is from a scheme in Stockholm in Sweden, which is a navigation system for blind people. In some areas where real-time information is not generally available, you can have a key fob which activates it. Personally, I think real-time information benefits everybody and shouldn't need to be exclusive to people with vision problems, but in some places that seems to be the way. So, let me summarize. I think it's clear to me in the transport environment that there is too little attention paid to cognitive awareness. We see very often far too many signs, without priority, without that hierarchy I've talked about. We often use signs to compensate for bad design, and we often use bad signs to compensate for bad design, and Richard showed us some very good examples of that. And almost always, the signs and the information is designed by people who are confident and familiar with the environment. That is a big mistake. I think it's also a big mistake to take away people from stations and other transport environments because it causes stress. And it's also, I think, a mistake to stop audible environments. For example, in airports, again, there's a perception that too many announcements causes stress. I think if you talk to most people waiting for flights, it's the lack of information that causes stress. So again, we need to rethink, and we need always to start with the least familiar passenger as the touchstone of what is needed. So policy measures, I think it's hugely important at government level, both nationally and locally, and indeed internationally, that we should ensure that cognitive accessibility is a standard policy measure, just as much as we have a requirement almost everywhere in Europe now that our buildings must be accessible, that our transport systems must be accessible to those with mobility difficulty. We must also have that same requirement for cognitive accessibility. And again, it's often the cheapest and simplest thing to do is to get the signage and information right. And if we then understand how much it benefits the whole of the travelling public, it really becomes a simple and obvious judgment to make. And it seems to me, although it's important that this is part of the law we have in Europe, we also need clear practical guidance so that it's applied internationally. It is not helpful if the pictograms in Spain tell me one thing and the pictograms in Germany tell me something different. So all of us now are international travellers. We need that reassurance at both ends of the journey that the information we're receiving has the same meaning. So clarity, consistency are fundamental. It's often the way that in a particular area or city, there's an idea that we will design our own pictograms, our own information system, which may be great for the people who live there, who know about it, but is terrible for people who are visiting. So always think about the stranger and the foreigner when you're designing. So finally, let me just end with this, that for me, empathy and understanding people's needs is absolutely at the heart of good transport planning and delivery. If we don't get that right, people won't travel and they won't feel confident when they're traveling. And all of that turns on how we communicate with people, how we communicate with them before they travel so they feel confident to travel, how we communicate with them while they're traveling. And as I've said, almost all of us have a cognitive impairment when we travel. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Ann. Creo que has aportado muchos puntos importantes a esta jornada. A continuación nos va a hablar Ruedi Baur. Ruedi Baur es un famoso diseñador gráfico. Nació en París, se formó como diseñador con Michael Baviera en Suiza. Regresó a Francia y fundó su primer estudio a principios de los 80. A finales de los 80 se trasladó a París otra vez, donde desarrolló proyectos de diseño para importantes instituciones como el Museo Picasso, el Louvre, el Centro Pompidou, para el que diseñó el sistema completo de identificación y de wayfinding en la reapertura del año 2000. En aquel momento empieza a especializarse en arquitectura y desarrollo, acercando la arquitectura y el desarrollo urbano a través de sus intervenciones. Creó, junto con Pipo Lion y la red de estudios Integral, y cuenta con varios estudios, uno en París y otro en Zúrich. Enseña diseño gráfico en Francia, en Alemania, en China, en Canadá. Tiene multitud de trabajos que podéis consultar en la página, pero entre otros pues, el Parlamento Europeo, Metrocable de Caracas, Aeropuerto Internacional de Viena, etcétera. También tiene muchísimas publicaciones y es imposible que os lo cuente aquí, con lo cual es más fácil que miréis la página. Muchas gracias, Ruedi, por venir aquí. Su idioma no es el inglés y va a hacer un esfuerzo también en hablar en inglés porque los traductores que tenemos son de inglés.
Excuse me, we will change language because I speak Globish and not English.
You speak? You speak what?
Globish.
Okay. Okay.
This
Okay.
language who is a massacre for the England peasant, but who has the same base. And I will, after this idea of policy, only speak about something I learned when I was teaching in China. China is the culture of China was without files 3,000 years. So there are also cultural situations whose the files is not in the center of our life. And I think it's important to know this cultural difference because when we start again to speak about universality and about police and about all this, I heard the same element who learners to our toll and Edward Said say is cool. That's probably something very European and not something who was the world. So at first I will I come with questions more as with answers, and what I will ask with you is this question is the solution. I think we are all agree about what we will do. I will not make again the speech about the importance of, I'm sign everything of both persons speak before. I have just a little problem with the answer. And for me, I will try to compare universal situation and contextual situation. And from time to time, a context make you have to invent a new language, you have to invent a new system, and you have to start again this approach about the accessibility. And I will give you one example. At first, I give, this is no time for this. So, we are here in an hospital in Vienna, an hospital for very, very old persons. Jude, the very little minority of youth persons in Vienna who was before often in concentration lagers, I don't know how you say in English. And we tried, they was a very terrible situation. They had a little hospital, very charming, and yeah, you have to make it new. So you enter in a big hospital. They build a building of 7 levels, and you are in this kind of anonymity who you know about what hospitals are. And this person was at before very, very quiet, and they enter in this new hospital with many technology, and was one stress because of anonymity, because of repetition of the same, because of hygiene, this kind of everything is white. And we work a little bit in confrontation with the architects, and we try, because Spencer, a very good woman who had, I think, his mother was a long time ago in this hospital, and she decided to work on diversity. So she decided to give many money to make at each room are different, go to Pakistan, buy elements who change the atmosphere, and ask us to make a science system who is based on this idea of diversity. And we decided, because it was 7 levels, to work on the 7 days of the week, not only because it's also because it's this very strong tradition of Sabbath and all this, and we decided to give a ritual in the hospital. And the ritual was very simple. We say each day something is happening in one of the levels. So all the persons in the hospital come in the level who happen this element, and you know we are on Sunday or you are. So it's bring again this temporaire et the temporary and the spatial orientation, because this is at all the base when you say real-time information is really this connection. I'm here, I will know what happened in the next half hour, and I will know where I am. These two elements are very important to be in connection. So we started first to make a very simple. It was important to be very readable, but this is not the solution. That at all is not the point to make you are oriented in an hospital. And then we work with the old picture who was in the old hospital, and we transform it in the new one. This director of the hospital was shocked. He said, that's only old element. How can you do a new system with this? But this element was at all the orientation for the old paper. So these pictures was very, very more important as our pictograms, as our text, as our elements, because he's bring a physical orientation in this place. So we work then with a poet who work on the different days. And you see there is a color system behind this element who help, again, a little bit to know what's the atmosphere of a part. And then we enter in the public space of each level. And the public space was based from the architect about this kind of seat and table everywhere the same. That's absolutely terrible, this way to say we have to organize a public space, so we build the same element in every place. That's absolutely the base of disorientation. If we are oriented, you have to create the difference. I think you explained it this morning very well. So how can you make a scenography of the difference? We start to work with old decoration of the Theater of Vienna. We take elements of theaters and start to make differences from one room to the other with symbolic, with elements who are at all very... And this come to be a room, a place, and an orientation. And I think we have really to work on this connection in between. As sign system, as wayfinder, we have to work on this double function who has the problem of, to resolve the problem of language of a place, to resolve the identification, because we have to look that all places on the world are not the same. We have to make this culture of the differences of places. We have to look the wayfinding, and we have to look on the scenography of the elements. So surely we work also on pictograms. But I will enter now in this discussion about pictograms. This was the base of our phone we do any months ago. Because there are every time a tendency in the moment when you say accessibility is to say all the pictograms are to be the same. You have to use the international pictograms. You have to, so there are different international pictograms. And you see possibilities. But at the beginning, I think it's very important, and this is, I think, one of the mistakes of the designers, the graphic designer, when they speak about this universality, is the first element we learn as children, 1.5 to when we learn the language, is to say this little dog is also a dog, and this is a dog. So this connection, this capacity of making families, of understanding the same behind elements who are different, are, I think, something really on the base of our cognitive construction. We learn to say the drawing are the same as so this is really this base of our construction of the cognitive element. And I think, I'm not sure this solution is more easy to say this is a hunt. This is a dog. This is a dog, yes, when we learn the draw, but at all, I think it's very different in context. And we see this morning very beautiful pictures about the stupidity of science. At the same time, I'm very observing the phenomenon of men and women toilets in a restaurant. In each restaurant, you have another sign. It's absolutely, but at all, you don't make big confusions. So we have we have to learn this cognitive element are different if you are in a very simple context like this is this or this is this, or in a complex context when you are in an airport and when you say this, you have to see this is a toilet and this is necessary. This is very more difficult. But when you are before, it's only a comparing. So I think we have to work on this element. We was looking for Vienna airport with a very difficult project we had about little transformation of the universal element. So nobody can say this is not the same, but is a little bit a touch who are coming from this airport. And this is, I think, the point we have to find out what's the element we need to conserve, because this is a table has to have an horizontal element to be a table, and what's the element we can change without problems. And I think this is the real problem we have to work every time about, and not to say we take a reel and you have to use absolutely this pictogram. So this was we tried to make a little perspective, and this bring any pictograms very more simple. And we introduce it in connection with a kind of typography, and you speak about this also this morning. I think the accessibility of language is also something very important. And also this kind of universal language like Helvetica or Univer are not so universal. And we find out the Federa is the best language, the best typeface for this airport, because in this airport we speak Slavish, we speak, so it's absolutely the right typeface for Central European element, but is not the right one for England. So it's also this idea to say we have to find out this element. At all, I think we can every time say an airport is this international element. You go out in the international sphere. For me, an airport is really the entrance of a country. It's a very, very important entrance of a country. So it's the identity, is a part of the identity of a country. And we have to work on these differences. But in the same time, to be all persons can understand it. So it's a mix in between difference and so I go quick. This was analyzing between what's an international element, what was before, and how can we make it better. But I will switch now in another airport, and only to present what the differences can be from one airport to the other. And I'm for this difference. I will cultivate this difference. And this is a little airport who is in between Düsseldorf and Frankfurt. And I think this airport exists now only because he had the capacity to bring himself out of the general system and to bring it a new semiotic at all. The semiotic of the cheap travel, of young travel, of so. And we base this, and the work we had is to bring it also in an international system, but in the same time to be different. So this was a little bit the element. So we base it on the typeface whose name is simple. We redesign it. And this is a typeface who is based on very geometrical element. And we use the same construction then to make pictograms. So it's a work about connecting the pictograms with the language and to bring it to one system. The idea was to make a mix in between functional element and element who has more fun dimension. Because one of the theory I have about orientation, when are you disoriented? When you are afraid. And the distress is one of the best parts to bring you again in orientation, is to say cool. This is you are in a place who are not over functional. And you see it, you present this automat. This automat, I'm also absolutely stressed on it because they express this authority. They express something absolutely hard. And I think this interaction in between objects and humans has to have a sensorial quality also. Has not only to be functional, has not only to be right, but has also to be, because it's the same, the connection in between two persons are from time to time more complex, but you are interested to have it as other time somebody starts with a brutality and you stop with everything. And I think this element are very important. How can we introduce something sympathetic, something functional but sympathetic? So that's the base of the system. Is at all a font. Every person in the airport can write with this, and this is very good. So you have every time the same elements, and you have it on the letters, you have it on the print, and you have it also on the. Then you have codes, functional codes, and you have more narrative elements. And the identity is based on this narrative element. It's very easy to go fly, or you come to Cologne to the carnival, or you go to the beach, or you go to China. So it's very, very simple elements who give also this, at all the philosophy we give at this airport was simplicity. How can we make something simple, a simple language, who you can play with it and be also functional. So that's different advertising, New York, but also elements when you need it really to bring it in explication. And what you cannot do with pictograms at all, that's verbs. You can say a restaurant, but you can not say I eat. So we try to introduce a second dimension, who are the humans. And these humans are not constructed, they are free. And they are different, they say something. And the connection in between the pictogram and the illustration bring it a little bit to a language. So it's not only the rain, is it raining, or you can go over, or you can take the taxi. So it's how can you go from a pictogram to a narrative system? How can you introduce also the pictogram in elements? And every time this play with the pictogram to bring it to say also it's not so difficult. Then we come again to functional elements, the timetable, who introduce also this element inside. Or the internet, timetable on internet, intranet. And every time you have this element who come again, you can do it. It's a little bit old, this system, but you can make a film on to say you again, you are to live in 4 days. Or you can make objects who come to be pictograms. That's parking. It's a little bit irony about this system of pictograms. But was for this place. We had also this very terrible, I'm agree with you about the quantity of elements, but we do it in 2 levels. We accept to do this puree, this element who everything was, but we make a very large distinction in between what is really the element you need and what are elements you don't need, or you need in a second time. And we have macro signs who at all give you the atmosphere of different rooms. So the sign system is in same time the decoration and the identity of the airport. This was the pictograms we do. So we work very seriously about legibility, about how can we recognizing, and I think any of our pictograms are better, any are not so good as, and I think it's not because Otto Leicher make one time a very perfect work, that's the discussion about the pictograms are finished. I think we can do it better. And this system with this double language was, I think, bring very more visibility as only when you have construction elements. Just as provocation, and then I finish, I will present you one pictogram system who is absolutely based on a context. So it's absolutely the contrary. When we think about pictograms, you every time think about universality. And I ask at a Chinese illustrator, I invite a Chinese illustrator in Switzerland, and I ask him to make a pictogram portrait of Switzerland. So this police is not the police of Madrid, it's typically the Swiss police. And we work about this system who was at all very, very, I think, very more accessible as international systems. Because the statute of the element was also more accessible. So it's not, you don't see it only if you will find out something, you see it also as a little story of the element. Surely all are not perfect, but is only, and the construction was, so you have the pictogram, and we had 5 languages of the language of Switzerland, but also a foreigner in Switzerland. So it was every time also accompanied about different elements. So only to say, you can also make pictograms who speak about a society, who are the portrait of a society in this context was absolutely perfect. In another context was not perfect, but in this context was perfect. And I think we have to work about this contextual construction of visual systems. Was little stories about these elements also. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Ruedi, por esta preciosa presentación. Hay un tiempo de preguntas. ¿Queréis levantar la mano? O esta tarde habrá el coloquio ese que os he dicho antes, lo repito. Mercedes, hay una pregunta por aquí. Micrófono. Aquí, levantas la mano.
Bueno, gracias. Soy Mercedes Belinchón, soy profesora de Psicología del Lenguaje en la Universidad Autónoma de Madrid y ya desde la mesa anterior quería, más que hacer una pregunta, hacer una reflexión en voz alta que se me ha visto confirmada o reforzada por las muy interesantes, para mí fascinantes, aportaciones que ha habido en esta mesa, ¿no? Se están planteando muchas cuestiones de fondo, de contenido y de formato, y yo creo que en la discusión sobre la accesibilidad cognitiva y cómo hacer más accesibles cognitivamente los entornos, se está obviando una cuestión que me parece importante y que son los supuestos que estamos adoptando acerca del modelo de comunicación que queremos, ¿no? Estamos hablando hablaba José Antonio Corraliza, del sesgo de los arquitectos, el sesgo de la mesa, ¿no? Es decir, adoptan su perspectiva, no adoptan la perspectiva del usuario real, que lo va a ver desde otra perspectiva. Se ha estado hablando aquí, la preciosa conferencia de Ann Frye, de cómo sistemáticamente los sistemas de información se diseñan al margen de los usuarios que lo necesitan y, si acaso, tomando como referencia sistemas que ya son expertos o usuarios que ya son expertos, pero no los usuarios reales, que son los inexpertos y los que realmente necesitan más ayuda. A mí me parece que en el contexto de la accesibilidad cognitiva y de la búsqueda de acciones en este sentido, es urgente incorporar un modelo psicológico de comunicación. Es urgente revisar el modelo de comunicación porque estamos presuponiendo a veces, o pareciera que las acciones públicas a veces están pensando en las personas solo como receptores pasivos de información. No es así. La comunicación humana implica que las personas recibimos y además podemos emitir señales. No solamente llamadas de alarma, sino también preguntas cuando no conocemos algo, ¿vale? Los modelos de las actuaciones públicas muchas veces ignoran que las personas no nos dirigimos a otras con un lenguaje universal, sino que los modelos psicológicos de comunicación nos dicen que nuestros mensajes se tienen que ajustar a los destinatarios concretos a los que nos dirigimos y que, por tanto, no puede ser igual, no es en la comunicación humana igual el mensaje dirigido a una persona mayor que a una persona adulta con discapacidad cognitiva, que a un niño, que a una persona simplemente turista o inmigrante que no conoce el idioma. Por tanto, me parece que en la última charla se ha puesto el dedo en lo que, a mi juicio, desde un punto de vista psicológico, es lo fundamental, y es a quién nos queremos dirigir, a quién queremos hacer o para qué hacemos las acciones de facilitación de la accesibilidad. Y me ha parecido fundamental que se hable de prioridades, porque me parece que los esquemas habituales de pensar en el diseño para todos piensan en una dirección que precisamente busca la máxima accesibilidad por la máxima cantidad de gente posible, y este es un objetivo legítimo de cualquier administración, y en ese sentido es verdad. Para un usuario concreto, en un momento dado, tener un mensaje en 5 idiomas, pues puede ser disfuncional. Pero es que probablemente la administración no está pensando en ti, que solo conoces un idioma, está pensando en todo el conjunto de personas que hablan otros idiomas y pueden necesitar esa información. Y igualmente, en ese sentido, me ha parecido maravilloso el planteamiento de que para un grupo específico de personas mayores que tienen una representación concreta de lo que es un hospital, la única manera de comunicar y de facilitar la ubicación en un hospital es usar claves que conectan con su conocimiento previo de lo que es un hospital y no generar un sistema ajeno de representación, porque la representación funcionará si conecta con lo que uno ya sabe. No funcionará como clave de interpretación si no puede conectar con el conocimiento que uno ya tiene. Y esto es un principio elemental de la psicología cognitiva de la comunicación humana, y yo creo que en este sentido una revisión de esos principios es fundamental. Igualmente que es fundamental validar psicológicamente, validar empíricamente la idea de que la representación más esquemática para los diseñadores recoge exactamente el conocimiento más compartido por parte de más cantidad de usuarios. No es así lo que indican los estudios sobre el desarrollo conceptual en los niños con y sin discapacidades, y sin embargo se está operando sistemáticamente con ese tipo de principios. Por tanto, a mí me parece que es fundamental esa tensión, ese continuo que se ha establecido entre la universalidad y la concreción, ¿no? La particularidad, me parece que es fundamental, y que desde el punto de vista de políticas públicas probablemente habría que buscar sistemas que conciliaran estos dos elementos. Es decir, información prioritaria, común, compartida para cualquier usuario de cualquier aeropuerto del mundo. Tiene que estar en un formato comprensible por todo el mundo, pero puede haber niveles de jerarquía en las representaciones, en los formatos, en los sistemas, porque a veces, a veces no, los destinatarios de los mensajes, quienes tienen que hacer uso de esa información, son siempre personas concretas que forman parte de microgrupos, mesogrupos y macrogrupos. Por tanto, me parece que aquí la reflexión tiene que ver con esa cuestión, entre otras, claro. Gracias.
I think it's more complex as this. I understand something very important about the sign system and cognitive element when I become this work in the Centre Pompidou. Because this a long story in France. Now we have 5 generations of sign system in Centre Pompidou. So it's a place of experience. But when somebody, the architect, asked me to make the sign system who was before me was absolutely perfect. From the functionality, it was a good reader in Helvetica, good contrast, the good elements at the good place, but it don't function. And this mean, and I understand this, you will see some signs in some place. So the cognitive elements are also based on context. When you are in a cultural place, you will see something other as in an airport. And if you have signs of an airport in this place, you don't look at it. So it's also this very strong element we have in our elements is to say we will or we don't will. That's the base of the sign system at all. Huh? The second one is we are afraid or we are not afraid, and then we can read it or we cannot read it. Then come the other elements. But these two first are so important to start the connection in a sign system, so we don't have to under-level this. And I think really a context-based sign system are from time to time very more functional as another. So I don't say it's the key in everywhere. But I think we have really to be careful about this idea, who is very simple to say, okay, we make now regulation and we will do the same everywhere and this will resolve our problem. I'm not sure this will resolve it. And you see it also when you go with our very, very super object who bring us now to our point, the smartphone or other orientation object we can. You forget it one time, you are absolutely disoriented. So we have to look that our, I say we are in the moment in the same change at when we start to transport the time on our. When you have every time a clock, you don't know what time it is. When you don't have a clock, you look at a time orientation. So it's really possible that different machines we become to make the spatial orientation bring us to disoriented persons. And we have to look about this. It's only to say what time we have to use it and what time we don't have to use it to really have this central orientation also in us.
No, reservadas todas para la tarde. Bueno, ha llegado la hora de comer. No hay mucha oferta en este barrio de sitios, diferentes sitios. En la calle Pablo Neruda es donde más podéis encontrar, que es la ancha que hay ahí. Y nada más. Bueno, lo primero, un aplauso para los ponentes. Y os esperamos a las 3:30. Gracias.